Before we dive into this wild ride, drop a quick hi in the comment section. It might feel like a tiny thing, but trust me, it makes a huge difference. That simple hi tells YouTube to share this story with even more sci-fi fans, more dreamers, more explorers just like us. I'd honestly love to see where you're tuning in from. Are you watching late at night with headphones on, or blasting this on a speaker while imagining the galaxy burning? Either way, say hi. I'll be checking.
Admiral Kextera watched 30,000 ships drop out of hyperspace around a pathetic blue marble called Earth. Perfect formation. Overwhelming firepower. Victory was certain. What she didn't know. Humanity had been watching her fleet gather for 6 months. And they'd been busy. 3 hours before the Zephyrian Armada materialized around Earth's orbit, Captain Jake "Bulldog" Morrison was floating in the maintenance bay of the stealth frigate Ghost Protocol, 15 light-years behind enemy lines. Oil stains on his jumpsuit, wrench in one hand, coffee in the other. Just another day at the office. "Bulldog, we got movement," came the voice of his communications officer, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, crackling through the comm system. Long-range sensors picking up hyperspace signatures. Big ones. Jake took a slow sip of coffee. Earth coffee. The real stuff, not that synthetic garbage they tried to pass off on the outer colonies. "How big we talking, Chen?" A pause that made Jake's stomach drop. 30,000 ships, sir. Maybe more. The wrench slipped from Jake's fingers, spinning lazily in 0G, 30,000. The entire human fleet barely numbered 800 ships, and half of those were mining vessels with jury-rigged weapons. But Jake Morrison didn't become the youngest captain in the Terran Defense Force by panicking. He'd earned his call sign "Bulldog" because when things got ugly, he just clamped down harder. "Chen, patch me through to Admiral Rodriguez. Priority Alpha." "Already on it, sir. She's been expecting your call." The hologram of Admiral Maria Rodriguez flickered to life in the maintenance bay. Even through the blue-tinted projection, Jake could see the steel in her eyes. Rodriguez had been fighting humanity's battles since before Jake was born, back when Earth was just starting to poke its nose into galactic politics. "Bulldog," she said without preamble. "Tell me you've got good news." "Depends on your definition of good, Admiral." "The Zephyrians are moving. 30,000 strong, heading straight for Earth." ETA. Jake did quick mental math. 4 hours, maybe less. Rodriguez didn't flinch. And the bad news? That was the bad news. A ghost of a smile crossed the Admiral's face. "Then what's the good news?" Jake grinned, floating there in his oil-stained jumpsuit like some kind of space mechanic turned warrior. "The good news? They have no idea we're here." 6 months earlier, the Zephyrian Empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for 3,000 years. Their ships were elegant things, crystalline hulls that bent light around them, weapons that could crack planets, shields that had never been broken. They were tall, graceful beings with silver skin and eyes like liquid mercury. To them, other species were either subjects or obstacles. Humanity was supposed to be a subject. When Earth's first diplomatic mission reached the Zephyrian capital world of Veltar, Ambassador Rebecca Walsh thought she was there to negotiate a trade agreement. Coffee for technology. Art for star charts. The usual first contact pleasantries. What she got instead was an ultimatum. "Your species will submit to Zephyrian rule," announced High Arbiter Zalthek, his voice like wind chimes in a hurricane. "You will provide tribute in the form of resources, technology, and..." He paused, studying Walsh with those unsettling mercury eyes. "Biological samples." Ambassador Walsh was a career diplomat. She'd negotiated peace treaties with the warmongering Korthax, trade deals with the profit-obsessed Vex Consortium, even a cultural exchange with the hive-minded Zarketh. She knew how to smile, nod, and find middle ground. But something about the way Zalthek said biological samples made her blood turn to ice. "I'm sorry," Walsh said, her diplomat smile never wavering. "Could you clarify what you mean by biological samples?" "You're young," Zalthek replied matter-of-factly. "The Zephyrian genetic enhancement programs require diverse genetic material. Human offspring will serve admirably." The smile died on Walsh's face. She spent 3 days in negotiations that weren't negotiations at all. 3 days of listening to the Zephyrians explain exactly how humanity would serve the Empire. Earth would become a breeding farm. Human children would be harvested for genetic experiments. The strongest adults would become slave soldiers. The rest would work the mines on dead worlds until they died. On the 4th day, Ambassador Walsh stood before the High Arbiter one last time. "High Arbiter Zalthek," she said, her voice steady as a rock. "I have Earth's official response to your generous offer." And Walsh looked him dead in those mercury eyes. "Go to hell." The war began that afternoon. Back to the present, Admiral Rodriguez had been planning for this moment ever since Walsh's ship limped back to Earth, shot full of holes and carrying the worst news in human history. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't just coming to conquer Earth, they were coming to harvest it. "Phase 1 is complete," Rodriguez told Jake through the flickering hologram. "Every stealth ship we could spare has been tracking their fleet movements for months. We know where they eat, sleep, and take their alien bathroom breaks." Jake nodded. The Ghost Protocol was one of 12 stealth frigates that had been shadowing Zephyrian forces across half the galaxy. It was dangerous work, one malfunction, one sensor glitch, and they'd be vaporized before they could blink. But it was necessary work. "What about Phase 2? Jake asked. Rodriguez's smile turned predatory. "Already in motion. Captain Torres and the Silent Running took out their advanced scouts 3 hours ago. As far as the Zephyrians know, Earth's defenses consist of a handful of orbital platforms and maybe 200 ships. And Phase 3? That's where you come in, Bulldog." The hologram flickered as Rodriguez transmitted a data package to Jake's ship. Star charts, battle plans, target assignments. Jake's eyes widened as he absorbed the information. "Jesus Christ, Admiral. This is insane." "No," Rodriguez said quietly. "This is human." The Zephyrian Armada dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 30,000 ships arranged in concentric spheres around Earth, each one a masterpiece of alien engineering. Admiral Kexthera stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Celestial Dominion, admiring the beautiful precision of it all. "Status report," she commanded, her silver skin reflecting the soft blue glow of the bridge displays. "All fleets in position, Admiral," reported her tactical officer, Subcommander Vextar. "Earth's orbital defenses are minimal. Perhaps 200 ships, mostly converted civilian vessels. This will be over quickly." Kexthera nodded. She'd been expecting more resistance. Humans had a reputation for being stubborn, but the intelligence report suggested they were also practical. Faced with overwhelming odds, surely they would surrender. "Open a channel to the human homeworld," she ordered. The main view screen shimmered, revealing the blue-green marble that was Earth. Cities glittered on the night side like scattered diamonds. Kexthera had to admit, it was a beautiful world. It would make an excellent addition to the Empire. "People of Earth," she began, her voice broadcast across every frequency humanity used for communication. I am Admiral Kextera of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. You are surrounded by 30,000 warships. Your military is outnumbered 100 to 1. Surrender now, and your transition to Imperial rule will be peaceful. Resist, and we will turn your world to glass. She waited for a response. On other worlds, this was usually when the local government began falling over themselves to capitulate. Humans, however, seemed to be taking their time. Finally, a voice crackled through the comm system. Older, female, with that peculiar human accent called American. Admiral Kextera, this is Admiral Maria Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force. I've got a message for you and your fleet. Kextera tilted her head. I am listening. You made one hell of a mistake coming here. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Jake Morrison's Ghost Protocol had been hiding in the shadow of a dead moon, 15 light-years behind the Zephyrian lines, for 3 months. Along with 11 other stealth frigates, they'd been conducting what the military called deep reconnaissance and what Jake called the galaxy's most boring stakeout. But boring was about to become very interesting. All ghost ships, this is Rodriguez, came the Admiral's voice through the quantum communicator. Execute Phase 4. I say again, execute Phase 4. Jake felt that familiar pre-battle flutter in his stomach. Chen, bring us to combat stations. Kim, warm up the torpedoes. Martinez, I want every ounce of power you can squeeze out of the reactor. His crew responded with the smooth efficiency of professionals who trained for this moment their entire careers. Lieutenant Chen at communications, her fingers dancing over her console. Chief Petty Officer Kim at weapons, running diagnostics on their modified photon torpedoes. Engineer Martinez diving into the guts of their antimatter reactor, coaxing power levels that should have been impossible. Ghost Protocol to all ghost ships, Jake announced over the tactical network. Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight here. We're trying to win an unfair fight. Hit hard, hit fast, and make every shot count. Copy that, Bulldog, came the voice of Captain Elena Santos aboard the Wraith's Edge. Let's show these silver-skinned bastards what happens when you threaten human children. That was it, right there. That was why they fought. Not for territory or resources or political ideology. The Zephyrians wanted their children. And humans would die before they let that happen. All ships, initiate attack pattern Delta. Target their command vessels first. We want them blind and stupid before we really get started. The 12 stealth frigates moved like ghosts through the void, closing on the rear elements of the Zephyrian fleet. Their hulls were coated with metamaterial that bent sensor beams around them, making them effectively invisible to anything except visual scanning. And who was going to be looking for tiny ships in the empty space behind a 30,000-ship armada? Jake's target was a Zephyrian dreadnought called the Star Cleaver, a 2-kilometer-long monster bristling with weapons and packed with enough firepower to sterilize a continent. Under normal circumstances, the Ghost Protocol wouldn't last 30 seconds against something like that. But these weren't normal circumstances. Range, 15,000 kilometers, reported Lieutenant Chen. Target locked. Fire, Jake said quietly. The Ghost Protocol shuddered as she launched her entire spread of photon torpedoes. Not the standard Terran Defense Force variety, but something the engineers had been working on in secret for the past 6 months. Each torpedo was loaded with a combination of antimatter and something the physicists called quantum disruptors, technology reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrian equipment. The torpedoes streaked through space, invisible to Zephyrian sensors until the moment they detonated against the Star Cleaver's shields. The Zephyrian dreadnought simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, erased. Where once there had been 2 kilometers of crystalline hull and devastating weapons, now there was nothing but empty space and a rapidly expanding cloud of exotic particles. "Holy shit," breathed Martinez over the comm. We just vaporized their flagship," Jake confirmed, watching the sensor readings with something approaching awe. "All ships, confirmed targets destroyed." One by one, the other Ghost captains reported in. 11 more Zephyrian command vessels had been wiped from existence in the span of 30 seconds. A dozen of their most powerful ships, including 3 dreadnoughts and the fleet's primary communication hub, were gone. But they were just getting started. Admiral Kexthera's world exploded into chaos. "Report," she snapped as her bridge crew scrambled to make sense of the sensor readings. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the Star Cleaver, the Void Stalker, and 9 other command vessels," Subcommander Vextar reported, his usually steady voice cracking with disbelief. "They're not responding to hails." "What do you mean, not responding?" "Get me a visual on their positions." The main viewscreen shifted to show the rear elements of the Zephyrian fleet. Where 12 of their most powerful ships should have been, there was nothing but empty space. "Impossible," Kexthera whispered. "Ships that size don't just vanish." "Admiral," her sensor operator called out. "I'm detecting multiple small craft in our rear echelon. They appear to be," the sensor operator's words were cut off as another dreadnought, the Cosmic Render, disappeared in a flash of exotic energy. "We're under attack," Vextar shouted. "Unknown hostiles, rear quarter." Kexthera felt something she hadn't experienced in her 3 centuries of military service: fear. Not the tactical concern of a difficult battle, but real, primal terror. Something was out there in the dark, picking apart her fleet piece by piece, and she couldn't even see it. "All ships, full about," she ordered. "Concentrate fire on the rear quadrant. Kill everything that moves." The massive Zephyrian fleet began to wheel around, 30,000 ships trying to orient themselves to face an enemy they couldn't see. It should have been a simple maneuver, they drilled it 1,000 times. But as they turned, they exposed their flanks to Earth. "Now that," Admiral Rodriguez said from her command center deep beneath the Colorado Mountains, "is what we've been waiting for." The Zephyrians had fallen for it perfectly. Panicked by the stealth attacks on their rear guard, they were turning to face the wrong threat. Which meant their attention was no longer focused on Earth's pathetic defenses. Time for Phase 5. "All Luna base stations, this is Rodriguez. Light them up." The Earth's moon had been a construction site for the past 6 months. While the Zephyrians were gathering their massive fleet, human engineers had been working around the clock, hollowing out lunar caverns and installing the most powerful weapons humanity had ever built. Mass drivers that could accelerate projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. Antimatter cannons that made their previous weapons look like toys. And, hidden in the deepest tunnels, something the scientists had codenamed Project Mjolnir. The moon opened fire. Streams of hypervelocity projectiles and antimatter beams lanced out across space, striking the exposed flanks of the Zephyrian fleet. Ships that had survived 3 millennia of warfare were torn apart by kinetic rounds moving at 20% the speed of light. Shields that had never been breached crumpled under the focused power of concentrated antimatter. In the first 30 seconds of the lunar bombardment, humanity destroyed over 800 Zephyrian warships. Status report. Kexthera screamed as her flagship rocked under the impact of a near miss from a mass driver round. "We're taking massive casualties from the lunar installations," Vextar reported. "Estimate 3% of the fleet destroyed in the first wave." 3%. That was nearly 1,000 ships. Kexthera had never lost 1,000 ships in her entire career, and these primitive humans had just done it in half a minute. Return fire. Target those lunar installations. We're trying, Admiral, but they're dug in deep. Our sensors are having difficulty getting target locks through the rock. Meanwhile, the stealth frigates continued their deadly work. Another dreadnought vanished. Then a heavy cruiser. Then an entire squadron of destroyers, wiped out in a chain reaction of quantum disruptors. Kexthara realized she was losing control of the battle. Worse, she was losing control of her fleet. Panic was spreading through the ranks as ship after ship disappeared without warning. Admiral, her communications officer called out. We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. Put it through, Kexthara snarled. Admiral Rodriguez's face appeared on the main screen, and Kexthara was surprised to see that the human looked almost disappointed. Having some trouble up there, Admiral? Rodriguez asked with mock concern. This changes nothing, Kexthara replied, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. You may have caught us off guard, but we still outnumber you 20-1. Surrender now, or we will glass your entire world. Rodriguez actually laughed. 20-1. Lady, I think you need to check your math. The Zephyrians had expected to face a few hundred human ships in a desperate last stand around Earth. What they got instead was the most complex military operation in human history, executed with a precision that would have impressed the galaxy's greatest tacticians. While the stealth frigates decimated the rear guard and the lunar weapons platforms hammered the fleet's flanks, the third phase of humanity's counterattack was just beginning. Captain Ashley Viper Knox had been waiting in the asteroid belt for 3 hours, her heavy cruiser Defiant Thunder powered down to minimal levels, drifting like just another piece of space rock. Along with 200 other ships, she represented the bulk of humanity's official military forces. But the Zephyrians had made a critical error in their intelligence gathering. They'd counted Earth's ships, but they'd missed the ships that weren't supposed to exist. All right, Hook vessels, this is Knox, she announced over the tactical network. Ghost ships have got their attention, Luna Base is keeping them busy. Time for us to crash this party. The human fleet that emerged from the asteroid belt wasn't the ragtag collection of converted civilian vessels the Zephyrians were expecting. These were warships, built in secret over the past 6 months in asteroid mining facilities that officially didn't exist. Fast, heavily armed, and designed with one purpose, killing Zephyrians. Remember, Knox continued, we're not trying to match them ship for ship. We're trying to break their formation, cause chaos, and let our secret weapons do the heavy lifting. The human fleet accelerated toward the Zephyrian armada, their engines burning at maximum output. 200 ships against 30,000 should have been suicide. Instead, it was exactly what Admiral Rodriguez had planned. Viper, this is Bulldog, came Jake Morrison's voice through the quantum comm, we've taken out most of their command structure. They're flying blind up here. Copy that, Ghost Leader. We're about to make it worse. Knox's fleet hit the Zephyrian formation like a knife through silk. The alien ships, already reeling from the stealth attacks and lunar bombardment, found themselves under assault from yet another direction. But worse than the damage was the confusion. Cut off from their command vessels, individual Zephyrian captains began making their own tactical decisions. And that's when the real slaughter began. The Zephyrians were used to fighting in perfect coordination, their movements choreographed down to the microsecond. When that coordination broke down, their massive numbers became a liability. Ships collided with each other trying to avoid human torpedoes. Overlapping fields of fire destroyed their own vessels. The elegant formations that had been their strength became a chaotic mess of friendly fire and confusion. This is impossible, Kexthara breathed, watching her perfect armada tear itself apart. How did they, Admiral? Vextar interrupted. I'm reading massive energy signatures from the inner system. Something big is powering up. Deep beneath the lunar surface, in a chamber that officially didn't exist, Dr. Sarah Kim put her hand on a control panel and said a silent prayer. Project Millennia had been the brainchild of humanity's best physicists, engineers, and military strategists. It was also completely insane. The theory was simple: if you could generate a powerful enough gravitational field, you could create artificial wormholes. And if you could create artificial wormholes, you could move very large objects very quickly across very long distances. The practice was considerably more complex. It had taken 6 months of round-the-clock work to hollow out the necessary chambers, install the gravitational field generators, and connect everything to what was essentially a weaponized black hole. "Control, this is Millennia Station," Kim announced. "We have target lock on the Zephyrian fleet. Requesting permission to fire. Millennia Station, this is Rodriguez. You are weapons-free. Show them what happens when you threaten Earth." Kim took a deep breath and pressed the firing stud. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then space itself began to twist. A wormhole tore open in the middle of the Zephyrian fleet, not a small one, but a massive distortion in spacetime itself, nearly a kilometer across. Through that hole came something that made even the hardened veterans on both sides stop and stare in awe. It was an asteroid. But not just any asteroid, this was Ceres, the largest object in the asteroid belt, all 900 kilometers of it. The humans had been preparing it for months, installing massive engines, guidance systems, and a payload that boggled the mind. 900 kilometers of rock and metal, moving at a significant fraction of light speed, emerging from a wormhole directly in the center of the Zephyrian formation. The physics were actually quite simple. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. When the mass is a dwarf planet and the velocity is 20% of light speed, the resulting explosion can be seen from other star systems. 2,000 Zephyrian ships were vaporized in the initial impact. The shockwave destroyed another 3,000. The remaining ships of the once mighty armada found themselves scattered across half the solar system, their formation utterly shattered, their command structure in ruins. Admiral Kexthera watched her fleet die and finally understood what she was facing. These weren't the primitive, backward humans their intelligence had described. These were military geniuses who had spent 6 months planning this moment down to the smallest detail. "All ships," she transmitted on all frequencies. "Retreat." Full withdrawal to Admiral Rodriguez's voice cut across the communications channel. "I don't think you're going anywhere." The final phase of humanity's counterattack wasn't about firepower or tactical brilliance. It was about something the Zephyrians had never encountered before: human psychology. As the surviving alien ships tried to flee the system, they found their escape routes blocked by small groups of human vessels. Not enough to stop them by force, but enough to slow them down. And in that delay, something interesting happened. The humans started talking to them. "Zephyrian vessel Crystal Dawn, this is Captain Martinez of the TDF Indomitable. Before you go, we thought you might want to know something about the species you just tried to conquer." Similar conversations were happening across dozens of channels as human captains reached out to their fleeing enemies. Not threats or demands for surrender, but something far more unsettling: education. "You see," Martinez continued, "you made the mistake of thinking we were like every other species you've conquered. Peaceful farmers, maybe. Technologically inferior. Easy targets." The Zephyrian captain of the Crystal Dawn found himself listening despite every instinct telling him to cut communications and run. "But here's the thing about humans," Martinez said. "We've been fighting each other for our entire history. We've developed weapons that can end civilizations, tactics that can turn overwhelming numbers into a liability, and most importantly, we've learned to think like killers when we need to. Similar messages were being broadcast across the fleeing fleet. Human captains sharing stories of Earth's wars, its weapons development, its refusal to submit to superior force. They talked about the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off an army. About the Warsaw Ghetto, where a handful of rebels fought tanks with handguns. About every time in human history when the outnumbered had found a way to win. You came here expecting to harvest our children, transmitted Captain Ellis of the Blood and Thunder. Did you really think we wouldn't fight back? Did you think we'd just roll over and let you take them? The psychological impact was devastating. The Zephyrians had built their empire on the assumption that superior numbers and technology guaranteed victory. The idea that a primitive species could outthink them, outmaneuver them, and ultimately defeat them was fundamentally incompatible with their worldview. But the evidence was floating all around them in the wreckage of what had once been the most powerful fleet in their history. Admiral Kexthera's flagship limped toward the edge of the solar system, one of perhaps 3,000 survivors from the original 30,000 ship armada. Her bridge was a shambles, half her crew was dead, and her silver skin had turned a sickly gray from shock and exhaustion. "Admiral," Subcommander Vextar said quietly. "We're receiving another transmission from the human fleet." Kexthera wanted to ignore it. Wanted to flee this cursed system and never think about it again. But something compelled her to listen. "This is Admiral Rodriguez," came the familiar voice. "I know you're listening, Kexthera. Before you leave, I want to make something clear." The main screen flickered to life, showing Rodriguez sitting in what appeared to be a simple office. No throne room, no elaborate displays of power. Just a gray-haired woman in a military uniform, looking tired but determined. "You came here thinking you could take our children," Rodriguez said. "You thought we were weak. Primitive. Easy victims." Rodriguez leaned forward, and Kexthera saw something in the human's eyes that chilled her to the bone. Not hatred or anger, but something far more dangerous, absolute certainty. "Let me tell you what you actually accomplished today," Rodriguez continued. "You united our species against a common threat. You gave us a reason to build the most powerful military force this galaxy has ever seen. And most importantly, you showed us exactly what we're capable of when someone threatens our families." The Admiral stood up, moving to a window that looked out over the lunar surface. In the distance, the wreckage of Zephyrian ships glittered in the sunlight like fallen stars. "Here's what's going to happen next," Rodriguez said. "You're going to go home. You're going to tell your emperor exactly what happened here. And you're going to spread the word to every species in the galaxy: Earth is off limits." Rodriguez turned back to face the camera, and Kexthera saw something that terrified her more than all the weapons humanity had unleashed. She saw a predator that had just discovered how dangerous it could be. Because if anyone, and I mean anyone, ever threatens human children again, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll come for you. We'll hunt you down across every star system in the galaxy, and we'll make what happened to your fleet look like a gentle warning. The transmission ended, leaving Kexthera staring at a blank screen. "Admiral," Vextar whispered. "What do we tell the Emperor?" Kexthera was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars whirl past as her damaged ship fled toward Zephyrian space. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "We tell him the truth. We tell him that humanity is no longer just another species to be conquered. They're predators. And we just taught them how dangerous they could be." 3 months later, the Galactic Council had been in emergency session for 6 weeks, ever since the first reports of the Earth incident had reached the core worlds. Representatives from a dozen different species sat around a massive conference table, arguing in languages that ranged from musical to downright terrifying. At the head of the table sat Counselor Zareth, a being so ancient that his species had achieved spaceflight before most others had discovered fire. He had seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth and death of entire civilizations. But nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for the reports coming out of the Zephyrian Empire. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," Zareth said, his voice like grinding stone. "A single world, inhabited by a species that achieved spaceflight less than 2 centuries ago, destroyed 90% of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy?" The Zephyrian representative, a trembling sub-admiral named Kolvex, nodded miserably. The humans had been planning the defense for months. Stealth ships, hidden weapons platforms, some kind of gravity weapon that could move asteroids through space. "Impossible," scoffed the Korthax delegate, a being that resembled a cross between a spider and a tank. "The Zephyrians have ruled this sector for 3 millennia. They don't lose battles. They lost this one," Kolvex replied quietly. "Admiral Kexthara's report is quite detailed. The humans didn't just defeat us, they obliterated us." The chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. If humanity could destroy the Zephyrian Empire's greatest fleet, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? "There's more," Kolvex continued. "Intelligence reports suggest the humans are expanding. They've made contact with several minor species in their region. Not as conquerors, but as protectors." This was even worse news. A single dangerous species was one thing, but humanity building alliances was something else entirely. "What do they want?" asked the representative from the Vel Consortium, a species of traders who had built their civilization on the principle that everything had a price. "That's the most disturbing part," Kolvex replied. "They don't seem to want territory or resources or tribute. They want—" He paused, struggling with the concept. "They want to be left alone. And they want other species to be left alone too." The chamber erupted in confused chatter. A species that didn't want to conquer. That fought only when threatened. It was contrary to everything they understood about how power worked in the galaxy. Counselor Zareth raised a skeletal hand for silence. "And what is the Empire's official position on this situation?" Kolvex's shoulders slumped. "Emperor Velthek has declared Earth and its surrounding systems to be off-limits. Any Zephyrian vessel found within 50 light-years of human space will be considered in violation of Imperial orders." The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. The Zephyrian Empire, the most powerful military force in known space, was publicly admitting that there was a species they couldn't defeat. "If I may," came a new voice from the back of the chamber. All heads turned to see the representative of a species so minor that most council members had forgotten they were even present. The Altarian delegate, a small, furry creature named Piptel, stood up on his chair. "My people have had indirect contact with the humans," Piptel announced. "When the Korthax raiders attacked our outer colonies last year, we sent a distress signal. We didn't expect anyone to respond. We're too small, too insignificant." The Korthax delegate shifted uncomfortably in his mechanical exoskeleton. "But the humans did respond," Piptel continued. "A single ship appeared in our system. Not to conquer or demand tribute, but to help. They drove off the raiders and asked for nothing in return except that we take care of each other." The small alien looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of beings who had ignored his species for centuries. "The human captain said something I'll never forget," Piptel said. "He told me that in their language, they have a saying, 'With great power comes great responsibility.' They believe that strength exists to protect those who can't protect themselves. The chamber was deathly quiet. The concept was so alien to galactic politics that most of the representatives couldn't even process it. So, Zareth said slowly, humanity has developed overwhelming military power, not to conquer, but to protect? That appears to be the case, Piptel replied. And they're very, very good at it. 6 months later, aboard the TDF Prometheus, Captain Jake "Bulldog" Morrison stood on the bridge of humanity's newest heavy cruiser, watching the stars whirl by through the main view screen. The Prometheus was a far cry from his old stealth frigate, bigger, more powerful, and packed with technology that would have seemed like science fiction just a year ago. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Chen, who had followed Jake to his new command. "We're receiving a distress call from the Tau Ceti system. Looks like the Vex Consortium is trying to collect on some old debts." Jake sighed. The Vex Consortium was a species of traders and loan sharks who had built their civilization on the principle that debt was hereditary, transferable, and enforceable by military action. They'd been collecting from minor species for centuries, turning entire worlds into slave labor camps to pay off loans their ancestors had taken. "How many ships?" Jake asked. 12 heavy cruisers and about 30 escorts. The locals have, maybe 6 patrol boats. Understood. Chen, send a message to Admiral Rodriguez. Tell her we're going to be a little late for the fleet exercises. Sir. Jake smiled, settling into his captain's chair. It was a good smile, the kind of smile that had earned him his call sign and cost his enemies their sleep. "We've got some debt collection to interrupt." The Prometheus changed course, heading toward Tau Ceti and another species that was about to learn what humanity meant by, "With great power comes great responsibility." Meanwhile, in the Zephyrian capital, Emperor Velthek sat in.
The marble steps of the Neo-Byzantine palace were worn smooth by 10,000 years of footsteps, each depression a testament to the countless souls who had climbed toward power, toward glory, toward the illusion of permanence. Emperor Constantine Xi traced his fingers along the ancient grooves as he descended for the final time, his ceremonial robes heavy with the weight of history and the bitter lightness of irrelevance. Above him, the night sky blazed with unnatural light. Ships, if they could still be called ships, pierced the darkness like silver needles threading through black velvet, their passage marked by the characteristic blue-white flash of Alcubierre drives engaging. Each flash was a reminder that his empire, once spanning continents and commanding the loyalty of billions, had become as quaint and powerless as a child's sandcastle before the incoming tide. The old world was ending, not with war, not with catastrophe, but with humanity simply leaving. For millennia, human civilization had been trapped in the most beautiful prison ever conceived, Earth itself. The empires that rose and fell across its surface were magnificent in their scope and terrible in their ambition. The Terran Federation had once commanded every inhabited world in the solar system, from the cloud cities of Venus to the ice mines of Europa. The Pan-Asian Collective had transformed Mars into a garden world, their terraforming technology the envy of every other power block. The Neo-European Union had built ring habitats around Jupiter that housed more people than had ever lived on Earth's surface. These were not the crude empires of antiquity, built on conquest and sustained by oppression. These were sophisticated, technologically advanced civilizations that had solved hunger, disease, and scarcity. They had tamed fusion power, mastered genetic engineering, and turned space itself into their domain. Their cities floated in the clouds, their farms orbited gas giants, and their fleets patrolled the asteroid belts with casual omnipresence. Dr. Sarah Chen Okafor stood in the observation deck of the Olympus Station, watching the Earth turn slowly below. As chief historian of the Terran Federation, she had spent her life studying the rise and fall of civilizations, but she had never expected to witness the end of human civilization as they knew it. not its destruction, its transcendence. "It's ironic," she murmured to her assistant Marcus Webb, as they watched a massive cargo hauler disappear in a flash of twisted spacetime. "We spent so much energy conquering space, but we never truly escaped it. We just made bigger cages." Marcus, young enough to remember when faster-than-light travel was still theoretical, shook his head. The Alcubierre drive changed everything. These old empires, they're like sailing ships trying to compete with starships. Sarah's reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Fleet Admiral Victoria Reyes, her weathered face bearing the strain of commanding a military force that was rapidly becoming obsolete. "Another defection," Victoria announced without preamble. "The entire Third Fleet has declared independence and is heading for the Proxima Centauri system. They're calling themselves the Free Stellar Republic." It was happening everywhere. Military commanders, corporate executives, entire planetary governments were abandoning the established order. Why maintain loyalty to terrestrial powers when the galaxy itself lay open before them? The old empires had been built on controlling resources and territory, but FTL technology had made both concepts meaningless. When you could reach any star system in a matter of days, when asteroid belts and gas giant moons were as accessible as the next city over, what was the point of fighting over Earth's increasingly crowded orbital space? The great space elevators that had once been the arteries of interplanetary commerce stood like monuments to a fading age. The Luna City spaceport, which had processed millions of tons of cargo annually, now echoed with emptiness. Ships no longer needed to crawl through conventional space at fractional light speeds, burning months or years to reach their destinations. The infrastructure that had taken centuries to build had become redundant in a matter of decades. In the executive boardroom of Stellar Dynamics Corporation, CEO Elena Vasquez stared at quarterly reports that told the story of an empire in free fall. Her company had once controlled 60% of the solar system's shipping and logistics, their massive generation ships and cargo haulers, the lifeblood of interplanetary trade. Now their stock value had collapsed by 90% in 5 years. "The numbers don't lie," her chief financial officer reported grimly. "Independent operators with single FTL-capable vessels can undercut our prices by orders of magnitude. They don't need our infrastructure, our refueling stations, our supply chains. They can hop from Earth to Alpha Centauri faster than we can get a conventional ship from Earth to Mars." Elena nodded, her mind already racing toward the inevitable conclusion. "Then we adapt or we die. Convert every ship that can be retrofitted with FTL drives. Sell off the infrastructure. We're not a solar system company anymore. We're going galactic or we're going extinct." It was the same story playing out across every sector of the old economy. Mining consortiums that had built their fortunes on asteroid belt operations were being outcompeted by entrepreneurs who could locate and extract resources from uninhabited systems. Agricultural corporations that had invested trillions in hydroponic facilities were watching their markets disappear as colonists established farms on pristine worlds with perfect growing conditions. The old empires had been built on scarcity, on the careful control of limited resources across vast, but ultimately finite distances. FTL had shattered those limitations, creating an economy of abundance that rendered their power structures not just obsolete, but actively counterproductive. The breakthrough that would ultimately topple empires began not in the halls of power or the boardrooms of megacorporations, but in the cluttered laboratory of Dr. Kenji Nakamura at the Mars Institute of Theoretical Physics. For 40 years, Kenji had been working on what his colleagues politely dismissed as mathematical curiosities, exotic solutions to Einstein's field equations that suggested the possibility of faster-than-light travel through the manipulation of spacetime itself. The Alcubierre drive had been a theoretical concept since the late 20th century, but the energy requirements were astronomical. literally requiring the mass energy of entire planets to create a warp bubble capable of carrying a single ship. For decades, it remained in the realm of science fiction, a beautiful mathematical proof that FTL was possible in principle, but impossible in practice. Kenji's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the discovery of what he termed quantum substrate resonance patterns in the vacuum energy fluctuations around Jupiter's magnetosphere. While studying the interaction between solar wind and Jovian radiation belts, his instruments detected something that shouldn't have existed: persistent structures in the quantum foam that seemed to maintain coherence across vast distances. It was like finding footprints in empty space, Kenji would later write in his landmark paper. The vacuum wasn't empty at all. It was alive with patterns, with structures that responded to gravitational fields in ways we had never imagined. Working with Dr. Yuki Zhao, a brilliant young physicist from the Europa Research Station, Kenji began to understand that the quantum vacuum wasn't just a passive medium, but an active participant in the geometry of spacetime. By resonating with these natural patterns, it might be possible to create warp effects, with energy expenditures millions of times smaller than previously calculated. The proof of concept came in 2157, in a test chamber buried deep beneath the Martian surface. Using exotic matter generated by their quantum resonance field manipulator, Kenji and Yuki successfully warped spacetime around a test mass no bigger than a grain of rice. The object moved from one end of the chamber to the other in what appeared to be zero time, measured by instruments that showed it had exceeded the speed of light by a factor of 3. The implications were staggering, but the scientific establishment remained skeptical. 40 years of theoretical work by a reclusive physicist and his young protege were not enough to overturn centuries of accepted physics. Peer review boards rejected their papers. Funding committees dismissed their grant applications. The major powers showed polite interest, but provided minimal support. It was Dr. Elena Vasquez, the same CEO who would later witness the collapse of her shipping empire, who took the first serious gamble on FTL technology. Stellar Dynamics Corporation had built its fortune on taking calculated risks, and Elena saw something in Kenji's work that the academics had missed: not just a new form of propulsion, but a fundamental shift in the nature of space and time. "I don't need to understand the physics," she told her skeptical board of directors during a heated meeting in 2159. "I just need to understand the implications. If they're right, if they're even partially right, then everything changes. Every business model, every trade route, every assumption about commerce and logistics becomes obsolete overnight. We can either be the company that makes this technology work, or we can be the one that gets destroyed by it." The investment was enormous, nearly half of Stellar Dynamics' research and development budget for the next 5 years. Elena bought out Kenji's patents, hired Yuki as their chief technology officer, and began the expensive process of scaling up from laboratory curiosities to practical engineering applications. The first successful test of a full-scale Alcubierre drive took place on June 15, 2161, in the outer asteroid belt. The test vehicle was a modified cargo drone, barely 10 meters long, equipped with experimental warp coils and an exotic matter generation system that took up most of its internal volume. The destination was simple: travel from the asteroid Ceres to Jupiter's moon Europa, a journey that would normally take several months for a conventional spacecraft. Dr. Sarah Chinokafor was among the handful of observers who witnessed the test from Ceres Station's observation deck. She had been tracking the development of FTL technology as part of her historical research, sensing that she might be witnessing a pivotal moment in human history. "The countdown reached zero," she would later write in her definitive account of the FTL era, and for a moment, nothing happened. The test vehicle sat motionless in space, its exotic matter generators spinning up to full power. Then reality twisted. The space around the test vehicle began to distort, creating visual aberrations that hurt to look at directly. Light bent in impossible directions, and the stars themselves seemed to smear across the sky in spiraling patterns. Then, in a flash of blue-white light that was visible across the solar system, the drone vanished. 47 minutes later, the time it took for confirmation signals to travel conventionally from Europa to Ceres, the test vehicle reappeared in Europan orbit, its mission timer showing an elapsed travel time of just under 6 hours. It had covered 550 million kilometers in less time than it took for light to travel from Earth to Jupiter. The age of faster-than-light travel had begun. The reaction from the established powers was swift and predictable. The Terran Federation immediately classified all FTL research as a matter of planetary security. The Pan-Asian Collective declared the technology potentially destabilizing to interplanetary order and demanded international oversight. The Neo-European Union called for a moratorium on FTL development until appropriate safeguards could be established. But it was already too late. Stellar Dynamics had filed patents on the core technologies in every major jurisdiction. Kenji and Yuki's research had been published in several academic journals before its implications became clear. The fundamental physics could not be classified, only the engineering applications, and even those were rapidly spreading beyond any single organization's control. Independent research groups began replicating the experiments. Smaller corporations started their own FTL programs. Most significantly, several colonial governments declared their intention to develop FTL capability regardless of Earth-based restrictions. The genie was out of the bottle, and no amount of legislation could force it back in. Admiral Reyes, then a junior officer in the Terran Federation Navy, remembered the emergency briefings that followed the first successful FTL test. The implications were obvious to anyone with basic strategic training. She would later recount. If every ship could travel faster than light, if every colony could communicate instantly with every other colony, if distance became meaningless, then our entire concept of naval power, of territorial control, of empire itself became obsolete. The military establishments of the great powers found themselves facing a technological revolution that threatened their very existence. Fleets that had taken decades to build and position could be outmaneuvered by single ships appearing anywhere in the solar system within hours. Defense networks designed to protect against conventional threats were useless against attackers who could bypass them entirely. Border patrol became meaningless when borders themselves could be crossed in the blink of an eye. More troubling still was the realization that FTL technology was inherently decentralizing. Unlike nuclear weapons or antimatter drives, which required massive industrial infrastructures and rare materials, the HFY drive could be built and operated by relatively small organizations. A single entrepreneur with sufficient funding could construct an FTL-capable vessel and become a one-person interstellar power. The old order was crumbling before it even fully understood what was replacing it. The first wave of FTL-enabled migration began in 2163, just 2 years after the successful test flight. It started small, a few dozen ships carrying scientific expeditions to nearby star systems, corporate surveys of potentially habitable worlds, and wealthy adventurers seeking to stake claims in virgin territory. But within 5 years, it had become a flood that no government could control or contain. Captain Maria Santos, formerly of the Terran Federation Merchant Marine, was among the first wave of independent FTL operators. Using her life savings and a substantial loan secured against her family's home on Luna, she purchased a converted Stellar Dynamics cargo hauler and installed one of the new Mark III HFY drives. Her first commercial run took her from Earth to Proxima Centauri with a cargo of terraforming equipment, a journey that earned her more profit in 2 weeks than she had made in her entire previous career. The old shipping companies couldn't compete, Maria remembered years later, as she stood on the bridge of her flagship in the Santos Interstellar Fleet. They had massive overhead costs, regulatory compliance expenses, insurance premiums calculated for months-long voyages through dangerous space. I could undercut their prices by 80% and still make a fortune because I didn't need any of their infrastructure. Maria's success story was being repeated thousands of times across the solar system. Independent operators were not just competing with the established shipping lines. They were making them irrelevant. Why spend months traveling on a scheduled passenger liner when you could book passage on an FTL ship and reach your destination in days? Why wait for quarterly supply shipments when entrepreneurs could deliver goods on demand from any star system in known space? The economic implications cascaded through every level of society. The great orbital manufacturing stations that had employed millions found their markets, disappearing as colonists established their own production facilities on resource-rich worlds. The asteroid mining consortiums watched their carefully negotiated territorial claims become worthless as prospectors spread across the galaxy, finding vastly richer deposits in uninhabited systems. But the collapse of the old order did not mean the end of concentrated power. It simply changed who held it and how it was exercised. Within a decade of the first FTL flights, a new class of ultra-wealthy individuals had emerged, built not on territorial control, but on mobility, information, and technological superiority. Elena Vasquez had leveraged her early investment in FTL technology into control of one of the first and most successful interstellar corporations. Stellar Dynamics had evolved from a solar system shipping company into a galactic logistics empire. Its FTL-capable vessels serving as the primary arteries of interstellar commerce. But even Elena was surprised by the speed at which new centers of power emerged. We expected the colonies to remain dependent on Earth for advanced technology, manufactured goods, and capital, she admitted during a shareholder meeting in 2169. What we didn't anticipate was how quickly they would achieve economic independence. Some of the first colony worlds are now more prosperous than Earth itself. The colony of New Geneva, established around Alpha Centauri b, had become a major financial center within 7 years of its founding. Its lack of regulatory overhead, combined with its position as a hub for interstellar trade, made it an attractive destination for corporations seeking to escape the increasingly desperate tax policies of the terrestrial governments. The planet Kepler 442b, renamed Paradise by its first colonists, had developed into an agricultural powerhouse that exported food to dozens of systems, including Earth, which found itself importing basic foodstuffs for the first time in centuries. Most dramatic of all was the rise of the Free Traders Guild, an association of independent FTL operators that had grown from Maria Santos's informal network of fellow captains into an interstellar power block with its own fleet, its own currency, and its own diplomatic corps. The Guild controlled no territory in the traditional sense, but its members could appear anywhere in known space, conducting trade, gathering intelligence, and enforcing their own vision of interstellar law. Admiral Reyes stood in the command center of the Federation's newest dreadnought, the Olympus, and contemplated the futility of her position. The ship was a masterpiece of naval engineering, equipped with the most advanced weapons systems ever built, protected by defensive fields that could withstand direct hits from antimatter torpedoes. It represented the culmination of centuries of military technology and the investment of resources equivalent to the GDP of a medium-sized planet. And it was completely useless. "We're fighting the last war," she told her staff during their weekly strategic briefing. These ships were designed for a universe where distance mattered, where you could control space by controlling key positions, where naval supremacy meant something. But when any merchant ship can appear anywhere without warning, when a single FTL-capable vessel can outrun our fastest interceptors, when battles can be fought across distances measured in light years, what's the point of all this firepower? The transformation of warfare was perhaps the most visible sign of the old order's collapse. The great space navies, with their massive fleets of battleships, carriers, and support vessels, found themselves unable to project power effectively in an FTL-enabled universe. Their carefully planned defensive strategies were worthless against attackers who could bypass any static defense. Their offensive capabilities were neutralized by enemies who could retreat to any of thousands of uninhabited star systems. More fundamentally, the concept of territorial control, the basis of all traditional military thinking, had become meaningless. How do you patrol a border when that border exists in four-dimensional spacetime? How do you defend a colony when attackers can approach from any direction through hyperspace? How do you maintain security when every civilian ship potentially has the mobility of a military vessel? The military establishments of the great powers found themselves caught in an impossible situation. Their traditional weapons and tactics were obsolete, but they couldn't simply abandon their responsibilities. The result was a series of increasingly desperate measures that only accelerated their own irrelevance. The Terran Federation imposed strict licensing requirements on FTL technology, then watched helplessly as enforcement proved impossible. The Pan-Asian Collective attempted to maintain control through monopolization of exotic matter production, only to see independent colonies develop their own manufacturing capabilities. The Neo-European Union tried to preserve their power through diplomatic agreements and trade partnerships, but found that interstellar communities had little interest in the complex protocols of terrestrial politics. Perhaps the most profound change brought by FTL technology was the transformation of scarcity economics into abundance economics. The old empires had been built on the careful management of limited resources, energy, raw materials, habitable space, strategic positions. But when an entire galaxy became accessible, when thousands of uninhabited worlds offered unlimited resources, when travel time became irrelevant, the fundamental assumptions of economics had to be rewritten. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the leading interstellar economist of her generation, documented this transformation in her groundbreaking work, The Post-Scarcity Revolution. She wrote, "For the first time in human history, we are not competing for limited resources. The galaxy contains more habitable worlds than humanity could populate in 1,000,000 years, more raw materials than we could extract in 10 million years, more energy sources than we could consume in the lifetime of the universe. The question is no longer how to divide scarce resources among competing interests, but how to organize an economy of effectively infinite abundance." The implications were staggering. Traditional concepts of property, ownership, and wealth had to be reconceptualized when anyone could claim an entire uninhabited world simply by traveling there first. Labor shortages disappeared when automated systems could establish self-sufficient colonies on dozens of worlds simultaneously. Even information, traditionally one of the most valuable commodities, became difficult to control when instantaneous communication across interstellar distances made secrets impossible to maintain. The result was the emergence of what economists called reputation-based economies, where social status and influence mattered more than traditional measures of wealth. The most successful individuals and organizations were those who could coordinate complex projects across multiple star systems, who could build networks of trust and cooperation spanning light years, who could navigate the social and political complexities of an increasingly interconnected galactic civilization. The morning of July 23, 2164, marked the first time a human being set foot on a planet orbiting another star. Captain Chen Wei-ming, commander of the exploration vessel Pioneer's Dream, took that historic step onto the rocky surface of Proxima Centauri b, a world that had tantalized humanity's imagination for centuries, but remained forever beyond reach until now. The planet was nothing like Earth. Its red sun hung motionless in a salmon-colored sky, locked in perpetual twilight on the day side where the Pioneer's Dream had landed. Strange crystalline formations jutted from the basalt plains, and the thin atmosphere carried the metallic taste of ionized particles. But it was another world, humanity's first foothold among the stars, and that made it beautiful beyond description. "I'm standing on the surface of Proxima b," Chen's voice crackled through the interstellar communication array back to Earth, the signal taking over 4 years to cross the void. The gravity is about 90% of Earth normal. The atmosphere is thin but breathable with assistance. And there's something here, something I didn't expect. The discovery that would reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe came not from the planet's surface, but from orbit. The Pioneer's Dream S sensor array had detected artificial structures in the planet's Lagrange points, massive constructions that were clearly of non-human origin, though they appeared to be ancient and inactive. First contact, whispered Dr. Sarah Chun-Okafor, when the news reached Earth years later. Not with living aliens, but with their ruins. We're not alone in the universe, but we might be alone in time. The discovery of the Proxima artifacts, as they came to be known, accelerated humanity's expansion into interstellar space. Every world, every star system became a potential archaeological site, a chance to uncover evidence of the civilizations that had come before. The artifacts themselves were constructed from materials that defied analysis, arranged in patterns that suggested advanced understanding of physics beyond human knowledge, and powered by energy sources that remained completely mysterious. But perhaps most intriguingly, the artifacts seemed to resonate with the quantum substrate patterns that made FTL travel possible. Some xenoarchaeologists theorized that the ancient civilization had used similar technology, that the quantum structures Kenji Nakamura had discovered were not natural phenomena, but the lingering traces of an extinct star-spanning empire. Within 5 years of Chun Wei-ming's historic landing, over 300 star systems had been visited by human explorers. The expansion was chaotic, driven not by government planning, but by individual initiative and corporate ambition. Independent operators raced to claim the most promising worlds, established mining operations on resource-rich asteroids, and set up trading posts at strategic locations. The New Frontier colony ship arrived at Kepler 442b in 2166, carrying 10,000 colonists and the industrial equipment needed to establish a self-sufficient settlement. Within 2 years, the planet had not only achieved food security, but was exporting agricultural products to other systems. The colony's governor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, marveled at the speed of their development. "We're not following the traditional colonial model," she explained to visiting journalists. "We don't need to wait decades for supply ships from Earth or slowly build up our industrial capacity. With FTL transport, we can import whatever we need from any system in the galaxy. Need advanced manufacturing equipment? Order it from New Tokyo around Wolf 359. Want genetic samples for our biological diversity program? Get them from the Eden Project at Gliese 667C. Distance is no longer a limiting factor." The interconnectedness of emerging galactic civilization was unprecedented in human history. Colonies that were hundreds of light years apart cooperated as closely as neighboring cities had in the pre-FTL era. Scientific research programs spanned dozens of worlds, with data and personnel moving freely between projects. Cultural exchange happened at the speed of thought, with artists, musicians, and writers drawing inspiration from experiences across the galaxy. But the rapid expansion also brought new challenges. With no central authority capable of enforcing interstellar law, disputes between colonies and corporate interests sometimes escalated into armed conflicts. Environmental disasters on one world could trigger economic disruptions across multiple systems. The sheer complexity of managing a galactic civilization strained human institutions beyond their breaking point. What surprised observers most about humanity's expansion into interstellar space was not the speed of technological development, but the remarkable adaptability shown by ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Men and women who had lived their entire lives within the comfortable confines of the solar system found themselves pioneering new worlds, developing new social structures, and solving problems that had never before existed in human experience. Maria Santos, now admiral of her own merchant fleet, established the first permanent human presence in the Vega system by converting an asteroid mining platform into a habitat that housed 50,000 people. The community, calling itself Vega Station, became a crucial hub for exploration of the local stellar group, providing supplies, repair services, and communication relays for vessels traveling through the region. People adapt, Maria observed, watching children who had been born in space play in the station's zero-gravity recreational areas. Give them a challenge, a purpose, something bigger than themselves to work toward, and they'll figure out solutions you never would have imagined. These kids have never seen a planetary surface, but they're as resourceful and innovative as any generation in human history. The children of the interstellar age were indeed different from their earthbound predecessors. Raised in environments where travel between star systems was routine, where multiple worlds were considered home, where the galaxy itself was their playground, they developed a perspective that was truly cosmic in scope. They spoke multiple languages, understood physics and engineering from childhood, and thought naturally in terms of interstellar distances and galactic timescales. Dr. Kevin Liu, a psychologist studying the social development of interstellar communities, documented the emergence of what he called galactic consciousness, a fundamental shift in how humans understood their place in the universe. Previous generations thought in terms of nations, continents, planets at most, he wrote. These young people think in terms of star systems, stellar neighborhoods, spiral arms. Their identity is not tied to any single world, but to humanity as a galactic species. By 2170, barely a decade after the first interstellar voyage, humanity had established a presence in over 1,000 star systems. The expansion was not random, but followed patterns dictated by the physics of FTL travel, the distribution of habitable worlds, and the economic logic of trade networks. What emerged was not a traditional empire with a central capital and subordinate colonies, but a vast interconnected network of autonomous communities. The Free Traders Guild had evolved into something resembling an interstellar government, though it exercised power through economic influence rather than military force. Guild representatives negotiated trade agreements, resolved disputes between communities, and coordinated responses to common threats. The Guild's currency, backed by exotic matter and FTL shipping capacity rather than territorial sovereignty, had become the standard medium of exchange for interstellar commerce. More importantly, the Guild maintained the communication networks that held galactic civilization together. FTL communication had developed alongside FTL travel, using similar quantum substrate resonance techniques to transmit information instantaneously across interstellar distances. The Guild's communication relays, positioned at strategic points throughout human space, carried everything from personal messages to scientific data to commercial transactions. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Guild's first Director General, reflected on the transformation during the organization's annual assembly on the neutral world of Concordia. Representatives from over 200 star systems had gathered to discuss common policies, coordinate joint ventures, and celebrate their shared achievements. "We've created something unprecedented in human history," she told the assembled delegates. "Not an empire built on conquest and domination, but a voluntary association based on mutual benefit and shared values. We have no capital city, no supreme ruler, no single point of failure. We are everywhere and nowhere, united not by borders, but by bonds of cooperation and common purpose." The network structure of galactic civilization made it remarkably resilient. When the colony world of New Harmony was devastated by a supervolcanic eruption in 2169, relief efforts were coordinated across 50 star systems within hours. When pirates began attacking shipping in the Arcturus sector, merchant captains from across the galaxy formed cooperative defense patrols without any central authority directing their actions. When researchers on Kepler 186f made a breakthrough in exotic matter production, the information was shared freely throughout human space, benefiting everyone. The true measure of humanity's transformation came in 2171, when the Terran Federation made its final, desperate attempt to reassert control over the interstellar colonies. Admiral Reyes, acting on direct orders from the Federation Council, led a fleet of 300 ships to the Tau Ceti system with the intention of imposing Federation authority on the prosperous colony worlds there. The response was swift and decisive, but not what anyone had expected. Rather than meeting force with force, the colony governments simply left. Within 72 hours of the Federation fleet's arrival, over 90% of the system's population had evacuated to other star systems, taking their portable infrastructure with them. The worlds that the Federation had come to conquer were left empty, their cities dark, their spaceports silent. "We came to impose our will on a rebellious colony," Admiral Reyes wrote in her personal log. "Instead, we found ourselves the rulers of empty worlds, commanding nothing but vacuum and abandoned infrastructure. They didn't fight us, they simply made us irrelevant by refusing to be conquered." The evacuation of Tau Ceti became known as the Great Departure, and it marked the moment when humanity's galactic civilization achieved true independence from its terrestrial origins. The old empires could still control Earth, Luna, Mars, and the other worlds of the solar system, but they had no power over the vast communities that now flourished among the stars. More profoundly, the Great Departure demonstrated that humanity had achieved something that no previous civilization in history had accomplished: the ability to transcend geography itself. When mobility became absolute, when distance became meaningless, when entire populations could relocate across interstellar space in a matter of days, the very concept of territorial control became obsolete. "We are no longer an earthbound species," declared Dr. Chinokafor in her famous address to the Galactic Assembly. "We are not even a spacefaring species in the traditional sense. We have become something new, a truly cosmic civilization, unlimited by distance, unbounded by time, unconstrained by the gravity wells that held our ancestors captive for millions of years. We have achieved the greatest dream of every previous generation. We have broken free of the chains that bind intelligent life to single worlds, single systems, single regions of space. We are everywhere, and we are nowhere, and we are finally truly free." As humanity spread across the galaxy, establishing new colonies and exploring ever more distant star systems, the ruins of the old terrestrial empires served as stark reminders of the price of stagnation. The great orbital stations that had once been marvels of engineering now drifted empty and dark, their massive structures serving only as navigation hazards for the occasional ship passing through the solar system. The planetary governments continued to function, but they governed increasingly depopulated worlds as their citizens emigrated to more prosperous and dynamic interstellar communities. Dr. Sarah Chinokafor, now in her 70s but still sharp and engaged, had devoted her later career to studying what she called the archaeology of the present, examining the physical and cultural remains of humanity's pre-FTL civilization. Her research stations on Luna and Europa had become pilgrimage sites for students of galactic history, offering lessons about the rise and fall of civilizations that were already proving relevant as humanity encountered the ruins of other star-spanning species. The terrestrial empires didn't fail because they were evil or oppressive, she wrote in her final major work, The Great Transition, From Planets to Galaxies. They failed because they were inflexible. They had built their power structures around the limitations of their technology, and when those limitations were transcended, they couldn't adapt. They tried to apply planetary solutions to galactic problems, to impose territorial thinking on a post-territorial reality. Their collapse was not a tragedy, but a necessary step in humanity's evolution. The most poignant example was the fate of the Neo-Byzantine Palace, where Emperor Constantine XI had once ruled over billions of subjects. The magnificent structure had been converted into a museum, its throne room now housing exhibits about the history of human government. Tour guides, many of them young people who had been born in interstellar space, explained to visitors how their ancestors had once believed that power could be concentrated in buildings, in titles, in the control of territory. It seems almost quaint now, observed Dr. Yuki Zhao, now approaching 90 and serving as the director of the Galactic Science Consortium. The idea that you could govern a star-spanning civilization from a single location, that you could control people by controlling the places they lived. We've learned that true power in a galactic civilization comes from influence, from the ability to coordinate voluntary cooperation across vast distances. But the collapse of the old order did not mean the end of human challenges. It simply meant that those challenges operated on a galactic scale. As humanity's presence spread across thousands of star systems, new problems emerged that required solutions beyond anything in the species' previous experience. The first major crisis came in 2179 with the discovery of the Andromeda signal, a series of structured electromagnetic transmissions originating from the Andromeda galaxy and clearly of artificial origin. The signals contained mathematical proofs and physical constants, leaving no doubt that they were created by an intelligent civilization. More troubling, spectroscopic analysis suggested that the transmissions were incredibly powerful, requiring energy outputs comparable to those of entire star systems. Captain,